This is episode 4 of our amateur video series of retracing Paul's first journey by rental car. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mike Manna, and my wife Judy was a huge assistant in this little trip that we took around to Paul's cities in central Turkey in September of 2020. And so we'd like to take you now from the city of Konya, which was episode 3, a major city of 2 million people, down to the agricultural area about 30 minutes southwest of Konya to where ancient Lystra is today. Now, it is actually only a tell there now, and you're going to see that. What you tell is an artificial mound formed by the accumulated remains of all the refuse of generations of people living on the same site, and many times tells haven't been necessarily all dug up by archaeologists, and this is what we're going to find at Lystra. So it'll look like it's just a low truncated cone with sloping sides, and you'll see about how high it is, and we actually walked up it and found some different things on the ground while we were there this particular trip. But what happened in Lystra back in Acts chapter 14? Well, I'm going to share that with you in just a moment. But what's significant about Lystra is that it's unlike other cities that Paul visited. Lystra apparently had no synagogue, although Timothy and his mother and grandmother were Jewish and they came from Lystra. Lystra appears to have been the first location where the apostles reached the Gentiles with the gospel of Christ without approaching them through the common ground of Judaism and not really using Jewish culture or Jewish history to be able to share who the true God is and who the Messiah, Jesus, was. We're going to see that in Lystra also, of course, there was a time of persecution, misunderstanding, and even some language barriers that they faced while they were there. So join us on this little journey. Big thanks to Judy for being behind the video camera. And I hope that you catch a little glimpse of what it must have been like to live back in Lystra when the Apostle Paul and Barnabas visited. Let's take a look. We are now on the road between ancient Iconium and ancient Lystra. And we're going about a total of trip is about 1/2 hour, about 18 miles in total. And looking forward to seeing what we can find at Lystra. But this is what the countryside looks like. Has some small towns in between Konya and the area that we're going to, with apartment buildings and fruit stands and different things that are around the area. So, but we're gonna go see what we can find in Lystra, but it's probably just a hill in the middle of nowhere. So we'll see. Here we go. We're here now in front of Ancient Lystra. Wow, I just can't believe that we're here. This is a tell, of course. We cannot see actually hardly anything here that shows that this was a major Roman city at one time. Uh, no archaeological digs have officially been done here. They found that one stone that was in the Konya Archaeological Museum. It was found here on this hill that said that this was the place of Lystra. So of course, if anybody does spend a good amount of time and a lot of money and cut into this hill, they would find some amazing archaeological finds, of course, being a old Roman city. Also in the Bible, it says here that on one side of the hill, there was a temple to Zeus, actually here in the city. Because we remember in the passage in Acts chapter 14 that we have Paul and Barnabas coming down here from Iconium. And this area was also, it was, even though it was part of a Galatia Roman province, its ethnicity was Lycaonian. That also means they spoke a different language. In Acts 14, it talks about them speaking a different language. And what is interesting is that when Paul and Barnabas came down here, there's a possibility that they made a cross-cultural misstep. Or just simply there was a misunderstanding, but because there was a cultural difference and language difference, they were misunderstood, mistaken for Zeus and Hermes. The people of Israel did this. And that was because this area was actually not fully immersed in the Roman culture, because they kept their language. But yet they were worshiping Zeus and Hermes, and probably they related to all the other ancestral gods from this area as well. So this is the city of Lystra. This is very significant for many reasons. But I'm going to go ahead, I think I'm going to go sit in that shade right now and share with you a little more from Acts chapter 14. Here we are again in front of the Tell at Lystra, and when Judy and I came up here, we found an ancient artifact. Yeah, it looks like in the 1st century, they may have had better transportation than we thought. Oh well. Here, I have just blown away to be here because of the fact that there are so many passages of Scripture that talk about this place and that affect me personally. It also affected me in thinking about cross-cultural ministry, also when I think about discipleship, and also when I think about even just the idea of equipping others. And I'd like to start by reading in Acts 14 here with you, when Paul and Barnabas arrived here to Lystra, and an incident happened. Verse 8 of Acts 14, Now at Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul speaking, and Paul looked intently at him. And seeing him, that he had the faith to be made well, he said in a loud voice, Stand upright on your feet. And he sprang up and began walking. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian language, The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their garments. They rushed out into the crowd, crying out, "Men, why are you doing these things? We are all also men of like nature like you. And we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways, and he did not leave himself without witness. For he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. And even though these words, they scarcely restrain the people from offering sacrifice to them. But now, like I shared earlier, at Iconium, Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, and having persuaded the crowds, they stoned Paul, and they dragged him out of the city, supposing that he was dead. But when the disciples gathered about him, he rose up, he entered into the city, and the next day he and Barnabas went on to Derbe. Well, it's just amazing what happened here in Lystra. We see a miracle that Paul and Barnabas did for this man. We see that they were working cross-culturally in a different language. And we see them helping to correct mistakes. One thing that I really enjoyed also noticing, and when I just read this, is that the message, even though it's one chapter apart, is very different. In the message that he shared in Pisidian Antioch, it was a whole history lesson from the Jewish history of how Jesus had fulfilled and become the Messiah. He had fulfilled that, but now here in Lystra, he is focusing on reaching and then sharing this particular message to a group of people that their worldview is centered around Zeus and Hermes and the imperial cult also probably. And he helps them understand about the God who made heaven and earth and shows that Jesus also fulfills these. So, two different messages, same purpose, as to honor and glorify Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God, and sharing this message so that these people would choose to turn and become part of this new family and follow the true God. Now, disciples, we know, were built up here in Lystra. Disciples came. Disciples grew. A church grew here. Actually, two. And there was one specific disciple that I'm especially interested in that came from Lystra. It says that Timothy came from this place. Timothy, of all people. I just love the relationship that Paul and Timothy had together. And Paul brought Timothy. He took him on the second missionary journey. He came back through Lystra, and it says that Timothy went with him. And he went on the rest of the way. Eventually, Paul discipling Timothy so much that he sets him up in leadership as a leader and the pastor of one of the greatest churches in all of Asia Minor, the church in Ephesus. So, what an amazing place. So much fruit that came out of this place, even though it started off with a very interesting beginning. And I just blessed to think about it. Being here, but also especially thankful for that even though there is no church here today, that the spread of Christianity has gone all over the world, and that we also can be like Paul and be raising up disciples and putting our energies into those relationships and helping see that the message of Jesus continues to be shared around the world. Here we're on top of Lystra Tell, and I just want to remind you the significance of this place. It was a city. On top of this tell, somewhere in one of the ends, was a temple to Zeus and Hermes, and it would have been some city walls, gates, but I've also on the hill here, there would have been some measure of protection as well already. And then in this place, Paul comes in, and through suffering, through persecution, through language barriers, a church is formed here. One strong enough to the point that it produces Timothy. And Timothy ends up being one of the key disciples of the Apostle Paul. And this is a site that will always be close to my heart now. Not because we climbed up this little hill, but also because, especially, of the lasting ripple effect of Paul's ministry here to Timothy, to the Ephesians, to those that took the call from there and took it all the way around the world to the point that I, even 2,000 years later, heard about Jesus as being the Messiah. And I was led to Christ. That same Jesus that Paul spoke about here, and also now has changed my life. So let's take up the gauntlet. Let's continue discipling those around the world, even from this precious thought of what started here in Lystra.